Hey, good day everybody. Just wanted to make a quick video touching on a couple key items that I've seen as discussion topics lately. One being cable management inside an arcade cabinet, and the second one being controls for dual joystick for a single player setup. I did want to touch on a couple other things too while I'm looking at this cabinet. I wanted to talk a little bit about attachment methods for monitors and 110 volt power distribution. So we'll touch on those a little bit as we go ahead. But this is a cabinet that I built for display to customers. I'm not a giant fan of a Frankencade like this one, but I wanted to build something that had a lot of features in it that I could show to customers to help them pick out what kind of features they wanted in a cabinet. This cabinet's an absolute monster. It's 4 foot wide. It's got a 40-inch monitor in it. It is about 7 foot tall. It is missing the arcade marquee. Dan Eschman just printed me one yesterday, and it's in the mail, so I'm excited to get that. Ed Yesko helped me design that and did a fantastic job on that marquee, so I'm looking forward to showing that off once it arrives. But let's talk a little bit about dual joystick control setup first. This, it's currently running Robotron, which uses dual joysticks for a single player. I'm a big fan of Smash TV and Total Carnage, both of which have 2-player support with dual joysticks for both players as well. I've always been a big fan of the dual joystick shooter video game genre. So I definitely wanted to build a cabinet with dual joysticks for players 1 and players 2. Ran into a little snag with that though. I was using a generic USB encoder for each of the players, so I've got 4 of those. And then my plan was to use a 5th for this joystick and a 6th for this joystick. The issue I had was that the Raspberry Pi only has 4 USB ports, so I needed to add a powered USB hub to plug the 5th and 6th USB encoders into. The issue I ran into was that upon power up, the Raspberry Pi would randomly assign addresses to the 5th and 6th, actually 4th, 5th, and 6th, because those 3 were plugged into the powered USB supply. It would mix them around. So every time I powered it up, it would take either player 3 and 4 and mix it with joysticks player 1, number 2, and joystick player 2, number 2. It would mix those up, and I wouldn't know what controls were which each time I powered it up. So I figured I needed to solve that by getting a USB encoder that recognized as a different name. So I found a USB encoder online. It was a keyboard USB encoder with 26 inputs. I made a custom wire harness that went from both of these joysticks to that single USB encoder, and then plugged that into the powered USB. So it's a little hard to see here. So what I ended up with was 4 USB encoders, 1 for each player, and then a keyboard USB encoder in the middle that both of those joysticks are feeding into. One of those generic ones plus the keyboard one are going into this powered USB hub and then going into the Pi. The other 3 generic USB encoders are going directly into the Pi. So when I power it on now, it has static assignment for the 3 that are plugged directly in, and then it keeps a static assignment on the generic one that's plugged into the powered hub because it's the only one, so it doesn't get confused as to which one's which. The keyboard USB encoder goes into the powered USB. Again, it's the only one named that, so it doesn't flip-flop that one either. So I've had no trouble thus far with any games supporting 2 joysticks for a single player using this setup. So next I'd like to talk about 110 volt power distribution. This is how I've been building my cabinets. I've had a power cord that comes into an outlet box. From there, the hot lead is going up to a household 110 volt electrical switch. and then back down to the outlet box feeding both outlets. None of the arcade units that I've made thus far have needed more than 4 outlets, but you could always expand that to a 6 outlet if you needed. I'm not 100% happy with this setup. One, it's a little expensive. All of those parts together, plus the Romex cable, is a little pricier. I've on my latest cabinet, I have installed I have one over here, an outlet such as this that has an integrated switch in there, and my plan is to wire that into an outlet strip. Solder the connections on the back here to make them nice and secure, and then heat shrink all of that to make it safe. So I'm interested to see how that comes out. This is a viable solution, but I wasn't crazy with it aesthetically, and then price-wise, I think it's going to be a little pricier than the newer style that I'm going to try out. So that's how I distribute 110 volt power. Next thing I want to talk about was the monitor attachment. So I've got an MDF panel that is creating my bezel, and what I've done is I've attached L brackets made out of plywood to all 4 corners of the screen. So there I can positively center the screen. No worries about it turning either way or shifting left to right, up or down. And then I've made a truss out of some scrap plywood. So I've just pocket hole screwed in a T fashion this piece of plywood to this piece of plywood, creating a truss. And then I've attached that with pocket hole screws to the side of the cabinet on both sides. I pressed it in, gave it a little bit of compression, and then when you drive the pocket screws, because they're at an angle, it gives it just a little bit more. So a super, super secure way of attaching the monitor. It does not wiggle at all. Using that attachment method, I know there's 100 different ways to skin that cap, but this is just the way I chose to do it. I like it this way as well because it gives me a lot of attachment points for my cable management. So let's talk a little bit about that. I use these zip ties that have a little eyelet in the end. I'll wrap those around the wires, zip it tight, and then attach the eyelet to the plywood using a 3/8 inch wood screw. So here you can see where I've attached them. They're all over the place. There must be 40 or 50 zip ties in here attaching the wires, the USB bundles, the power supplies, you name it. I still need to fix this. This is a splice I did. This originally went across nice and tight, all managed up to the amplifier up here. When I installed the trackball, I realized, the trackball needs 12 volt power, and I didn't have a supply for 12 volt power besides my amplifier. So I spliced in right here, and that's going down to the trackball. But I never cleaned it up. I never gave this the sufficient wire length to route it, so it was kind of out of the way of the monitor, and then I never cleaned that up either. So that's a project I need to do one of these days. So I like to do it that way. I like to keep everything nice and separate just in case I ever ran into a power issue or had a bad wire that needed changed out. Everything is fairly separated, which would make it easy to maintain in the future, if anything ever needed to be swapped out. So this cabinet is, it's probably 90% done. I don't know that it'll ever be 100% finished. Looking forward to getting that marquee that Ed Yesko designed and Dan Eschman printed for me. Hopefully I'll have a picture of this in the next week or so with that beautiful marquee that those guys helped me out with. So look forward to that in the future. Hopefully this video was helpful for everybody. Any comments or questions, just let me know. Thanks.